Recording.
Okay, well, we can declare a quorum and call the meeting to order. We'll now ask our clerk, Connor Ayers, to call roll for attendance.
Thank you. Councilor Gonzalez.
Good morning.
Councilor Nolan.
Hello.
Councilor Rosenthal.
Hello.
Councilor Lewis.
Present.
Councilor Simpson and President Peterson are both excused today, and Deputy Council President Wong.
Present. Okay, before we begin our agenda items, can we please play the safety video for our in-person attendees? Okay, we have one work session topic today, a discussion that follows on parks and nature bond audit. In 2019, the Metro Council relied on community feedback to structure a parks and nature bond to focus on three overarching criteria: racial equity, climate resilience, and community engagement. When planning investments that protect clean water, restore fish and wildlife habitat, and provide opportunities for people to access nature close to home. Last year, the Metro Auditor evaluated the parks and nature bond's readiness to increase access and equitable access to parks, trails, and nature areas. The audit recommended that the department strengthen its approach to articulating and measuring performance on access. At that time, this council reiterated its desire for Metro to strengthen its ability to tell stories about the impact of a bond. Since then, staff have been working diligently to identify strategies to describe bond goals related to access more clearly. The Parks and Nature team is here today to share an update on these strategies and to further develop to the findings of the audit. Here today are John Blasher, Director of Parks and Nature, and Beth Cohen.
Good morning, Deputy Council President Wong and councilors. John Blasher, Parks and Nature Director. We have some slides too that we'll pull up. But we're here today to provide an update on the work to respond to the audit of Metro's Parks and Nature bonds that was approved by voters in 2019 to improve water quality, fish and wildlife habitat, and connect people with nature close to home. Work is on track to address all the recommendations in the audit by the end of 2024, and we're here to provide an update at this midpoint to confirm that we're on the right track. Also zooming out for a second as we close out this fiscal year after a busy spring and head into the busy summer season. Continually grateful to council's leadership, allowing us to make meaningful bond investments through the region, which include the reopening of Blue Lake Park this past May after extensive construction there. And also we're providing access to the lake with personal watercraft this summer, which is really exciting. Also all the support to advance meaningful engagement, community engagement at Willamette Cove and Lone Fir, continuing to acquire, stabilize, and restore priority habitat across the region, and continued grants and local share allocations to partners. And we'll be actually bringing a Nature Neighborhoods Capital Grant recommendation to you all next week. We're excited about. We'll go to the next slide, please. So as you may recall, during the audit discussion last summer, management shared that we overall agreed with and accepted the audit recommendations. Also, we felt that given some of the timing and scope, the audit's emphasis on public access didn't consider the impact of the grants, local share programs, and the broader benefits of habitat for habitat's sake. At that time, we heard council's request to have a more robust conversation around articulating access for bond investments and activities, and we're here today to be responsive to that. So getting council's direction today on our approach to the audit recommendations and findings will ensure that the work that we use to carry out bond investments and outcomes is in line with council's values and policy direction. Next slide, please. So to that end, we're here to cover a few topics with you all. We want to do a brief recap of the Parks and Nature Bond audit. We also want to do an overview of the ways that we're responding to the audit by describing a multi-dimensional concept of access and preview some of the draft tools to report on bond performance with respect to access. We also want to preview some opportunities for council direction and review moving ahead. With that, we can go to the next slide and I'm going to pass it to Beth.
Thanks, John. Well, Beth Cohen, she, her. I work in Parks and Nature and excited to be with you today. So I'm here representing the work of a lot of folks in our department, and especially Scotty Ellis, was in briefings with y'all and who's doing his civic duty today by sitting for jury duty, or maybe hoping not to get called for jury duty. So as you may recall, the Metro Auditor completed an initial audit of the Parks and Nature Bond in 2022 and presented it to the council in summer of 2023. The audit focused on whether and how Metro was prepared to increase access to parks, trails, and natural areas in alignment with the bond's aspirations, principles, and criteria. And the audit found a lack of clarity about the specific outcomes the bond sought to accomplish related to public access, and that the overall performance management system was underdeveloped. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. Okay, this is a snapshot of the kind of buckets of recommendations from the audit, which you can see on the left-hand side of the screen in the dark blue. And on the right-hand rows, you can see kind of where Parks and Nature is taking action to address. There are kind of 4 thematic buckets of recommendations that we're working to respond to. 1 is setting measurable goals. 2 is building a performance evaluation system and reporting on progress. 3 is ensuring that the feedback we get from community shapes and continues to shape our work. And 4 is updating the Parks and Nature System Plan in alignment with what we are finding. These are similar to what you heard from the management response last summer. Like John said, all these actions are currently underway and we expect to be complete by the end of this calendar year. For the purposes of today, we're going to be focusing on that light blue row at the top of the screen, as the council direction that we hopefully get from you today will allow us to shape the rest of those outcomes that you can see below that blue bar. And I'll just note that we have been sharing updates with our Natural Areas Oversight Committee, which also got a presentation from the auditor last fall. So they've been really interested to hear about this. Okay, next slide. Cool. Okay, so one thing that the audit really helpfully pointed out and found was that we could be clearer about how we're approaching access for bond investments. We totally agree. But in kind of processing that recommendation, what surfaced for us was kind of a distinction between where the audit emphasized access, which you can see at the top part of the triangle, focusing more on opening new nature parks and the kind of getting to all Metro natural areas. And at the bottom half of the triangle articulates how the department has been thinking about access, which John kind of talked through, but emphasizes a variety of elements, including the benefits of habitat for habitat's sake, which is a core piece of our work. The part of the bond, almost half of bond funds that go to pass-through funding through local share grants that invest in parks, trails, and natural areas across the region. And so we are kind of highlighting this for you today because at that policy level, what we need from you is kind of affirmation or adjustments to how our department's thinking about this. If we get that affirmation today, we're going to be able to continue implementing overall reporting, bond investments that align with that direction. So that's our hope, is that you can confirm what I'm about to present aligns with your values, but also feels responsive to what we heard from the auditor. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. This may look familiar because we just did a round of briefings where we talked through this Trillium graphic that you can see on the screen. And we're going to spend the next couple slides walking through the elements of this proposed multidimensional concept of access for the Parks and Nature Bond. Just zooming back for 1 second, though, want to share that, like, how we got here. So, in alignment with direction from you all, our team has been working to develop a bond evaluation outcomes framework to articulate the impacts of bond investments on the region in alignment with the bond criteria of racial equity, community engagement, and climate resilience. The framework is built on our understanding of the 6 bond program areas, what they can invest in, what they can do, and how they can address those 3 bond criteria. But it's also built on the community feedback we heard to develop the bond and during bond implementation. So as we were kind of processing the audit recommendations around a concept for access, we felt that the framework that you can see, and we'll talk through more in a minute, really provides a compelling approach to describing how bond investments are addressing and improving access in multiple ways. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. You're going to see this in a couple slides. So here's kind of how the story that we think is compelling goes. Healthy habitat, which you can see in green, is the backbone of our work. This is core and speaks to our unique role in the region, focusing on habitat for habitat's sake. We're advancing this vision through bond investments by preserving, protecting, restoring, connecting habitat. Over 800 acres acquired to date, and plenty more coming, and launching capital restoration projects. This also reflects how, through multiple grant and local share programs, bond investments are helping park providers acquire green space and future parkland as well. Lastly, this piece recognizes that anyone in the region benefits from healthy habitat anywhere, even if it's not directly, close to you, because clean air, clean water benefit us all. And that's something that we've heard over and over again from community and also from the voters of the region. I will note that just from a visual standpoint, we did hear from you in the briefings about, given the core and centrality of healthy habitat to our work, could we play around with how it's represented in this flower? And we're still taking feedback. So I just want to note that if you have feedback on the visualization. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So the next part is, because of that core work on healthy habitat, we believe bond investments increase access in 3 ways that I'll talk through over the next 3 slides. And the first is what we're calling, you can see it highlighted in blue, proximity and experience, or making sure that people in Greater Portland can have meaningful encounters with nature close to home. So just really quickly, some examples of how we're advancing this vision through bond investments at our developed sites like Blue Lake Park, Graham Oaks, Oxbow, to make sure that visitors' needs are met and feel safe and welcome, supporting local share projects that are, and grant awards, over 60 million awarded to date, that are increasing the distribution of parks, trails, and natural areas in communities across the region, and creating opportunities for residents of the region to connect with nature in their neighborhoods. Investing in culturally relevant land and sites meant to give Indigenous, Black, and other people of color meaningful experiences in nature. And then prioritizing addressing barriers to ADA accessibility, both at our own sites, and then actually a fair amount of our local share projects awarded are also designed to increase overall accessibility in local projects. Okay, next slide. So now we're on the second pedal, highlighted in rust, I think, and it's titled Community Empowerment. This pedal is a recognition that when bond investments and programs are shaped in a meaningful way and an ongoing way by community, community can become empowered to be co-creators of their parks and natural areas. And we've all seen that when that happens, we get better, more reflective, more diverse parks and natural areas in our region. We're advancing this vision specifically by ongoing efforts to engage underserved partners and communities in project selection and development, ranging from community choice grants to site-specific engagement happening at Blue Lake Park, Lone Fir Memorial, Willamette Cove Master Plan, but also the significant engagement we did during bond refinement to get community members and indigenous communities back on land acquisition priorities. We're also asking our local partners to do the same and engage with community to identify project priorities. Okay, next slide. This last petal that we'll talk through, we're calling economic vitality. And we're advancing this vision by ensuring that bond investments increase prosperity for historically marginalized workers and contractors through focusing on co-bid participation rates and supporting participation by a diverse workforce on bond-funded construction projects, both Metro's own and projects that our local share partners are completing. Taken together, we believe that these efforts can support economic stability for communities across the region. And this petal also reflects that we know that access to nature is a key part of what makes our region a desirable place to live, work, and visit, and contributes to overall regional prosperity. Okay, next slide. So we believe these 4 petals work to create community and climate resiliency. And this is the overarching goal that we're working towards across all bond investments. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So zooming, I guess, up and out a little, you can see kind of the flower from a different perspective, and just want to talk about kind of like why we think this is so meaningful from our perspective. But we believe this framework just helps describe a compelling outcome-driven story across the bond of how access is advanced in multiple ways, but that allows us to situate it within the larger agency and regional context, but be really clear that the outcomes we're aiming for are tied to bond investments and things that we can invest in with the bond. Allows us to take the complicated or multiple goals from the bond language itself and kind of simplify them into 4 buckets that are flexible and hopefully are meaningful. And then lastly, kind of has a recognition that individual bond projects and programs may hit each of those 4 outcomes in different ways, and that's okay. And taken together, the portfolio of bond projects, programs, and investments over the life of the bond will be able to advance all 4 petals to that kind of center, community, and climate resiliency. So assuming we get council's kind of affirmation of this approach, hopefully today, maybe in the future, we can continue to hone reporting materials and advance investments that meet these elements and use those impact areas to measure success of the bond. So if we go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about what that's going to look like. So you can see this evaluation framework on the slide. And what this does is it allows us to put that Trillium image kind of into action from an evaluation perspective. This approach is something we've shared with you previously, but we feel this slide kind of this image ties it into kind of a helpful visual so we can kind of describe this process. So for each of the 4 impact areas displayed in the Trillium graphic, what we're doing is kind of building each one of those elements along the circle. Describing our vision, articulating the direct outcomes we're seeking, identifying specific metrics that are measurable and indicators that we're measuring over time, collecting data, both qualitative and quantitative, that speaks to the investments that we make and the impact of those investments that we're going to be collecting, that then is going to allow us on an annual basis to evaluate with you all and others, how are we doing and how can we improve? We are gearing up, so this would be an annual evaluation. We're gearing up to launch it fully by the next fiscal year. But the good news is we have the work in place now to actually pull a lot of the data and tools together in partnership with our oversight committee to inform the committee's year 3 report, which you'll get this fall along with our Parks and Nature annual report. And just lastly, and we kind of covered this a little in the briefings, we're building out some visual storytelling tools on our website that we'll be able to publish and share this annual evaluation, these elements, so that you, our oversight committee members of the public, can track on an ongoing basis how we're doing. And we believe that that process, the storytelling tools are going to give us the language and the tools we need to have continued conversation with community about how we're doing and where there may be places to adjust our approach. Okay, next slide. So that kind of is brackets that kind of concept of access and evaluation piece. If it's helpful, I was just going to touch on the last two audit recommendations, which are slightly different from that. And then we're going to wrap up and hear your comments. But basically, the third recommendation was all about focusing on how we're documenting, reporting out, and utilizing community input to inform our projects and planning. And I can just report back that we're currently strengthening our capacity through our Parks and Nature communications and engagement team to utilize systems for engagement reporting and making sure that the feedback that we get, we share back out with community, but it informs the projects and also is shared internally to kind of build a narrative that can shape future Parks and Nature planning and project efforts. And this is great timing because, as you know, we're launching several community engagement activities for projects like Blue Lake Park renovation, Lone Fir Memorial, and Willamette Cove Master Plan. So we're kind of actively engaged in this right now. Okay, next slide. And then just lastly, the kind of last recommendation from the audit was about asking Parks and Nature to update its system plan to clarify how access is going to be prioritized moving forward with other agency goals. And obviously this extends beyond just the 2019 Parks and Nature bond. But just to note, you know, as you recall, the Parks and Nature system plan, which was adopted by the council in 2016, lays out Parks and Nature's mission and role. The status of the portfolio and strategies for the future includes a call for an update every 5 to 7 years. So as such, our department is working right now at the staff level on a collection of projects for future council review and approval that could form the foundation of an updated system plan, including an updated racial equity action plan, a tribal government engagement plan, an accessibility transition plan, and levels of service plan. And I'll just say that we're actively working to take what we're learning here, the feedback we get from you all, to shape those efforts as well. And you'll definitely hear more about that to come. So I think I'm going to hand it off to John to talk next steps and tee up some questions for you all.
Thanks. We can go to the next slide, please. Thanks, Beth. Counselors, we appreciate the initial feedback that you shared on this concept of access during the recent round of briefings that we had. We imagine this is the beginning of more conversations with council as we refine additional details of the elements of the evaluation process. There's some other details that we can underline kind of that overarching concept that we walked through today, including specific language for outcomes, vision statements, individual metrics, and data sources. So we'd love to continue reviewing those with you as you're interested. And at this point, hoping to get your thumbs up on the overall approach that will allow us to keep refining the process and develop more detailed materials for you. As we come up on some of this, here's some other touch points and engagement opportunities we see. As we mentioned, we'll continue providing opportunities to review all of the and approve different bond investments of this summer, refining some of the concepts of access and those tools that we have. And then the annual report from the Natural Oversight Committee will be this fall for the year 3. So we've been keeping that Oversight Committee updated with all these topics and expect the committee to use this framework as part of their annual review to report to council. And then also we anticipate providing some more updates on how we're going to be developing the system plan update. And in addition to reporting policy documents, council, you'll keep seeing all of the bond investments that we've been moving forward and being able to report back on this framework as we get your thumbs up on it. So we can go to the next slide, please. So wrapping up, we're really eager to hear your feedback today on how we can continue this work and course correct as needed. We anticipate this being one of many more conversations that will ensure that the bond investments, activities, and outcomes continue to advance council's values, policy, and direction. And would love to also get any feedback on how we can follow up with you more to discuss any of this work in detail. But kind of wrapping up here, just curious if you have any thoughts on how does this work respond to the audit recommendations align with your expectations? And then is there anything missing from that multidimensional concept of access for Parks and Nature bond that we described today? And with that, thank you. And I'll turn it back over for questions.
Great, thank you. Colleagues, questions, comments? We'll start with Counselor Nolan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the presentation and thanks for the opportunity to brief it earlier. I just want to put in this discussion from our earlier briefing, a real emphasis on, as you're moving toward multidimensional definition or concept of access, I don't want that to diminish the emphasis on our overarching racial equity values. That not all elements of your proposal should be treated as co-equal. I appreciate the case you've made for multidimensional concept, but if it detracts from or somehow demotes to a lower emphasis racial equity, I am not supportive. I really want to have Metro live in its programs the overarching values that are our racial equity plan and our climate smart approach. So if you can assure me that some concepts are more equal, and particularly racial equity and climate champion, leadership are more equal, then I'm fine. But if this is really an intent to diminish emphasis on those, then you haven't convinced me yet.
Thank you, Counselor Nolan. And no, this won't diminish that work. In a lot of ways, this has come from the racial equity work and in community conversations, is that if the concept of access is simply, is there a park nearby that you can get to? We're missing out on the multidimensional aspect that we heard from communities about being able to be more involved in decision-making about what, when, why, and where. What is the different types of amenities and experience that folks can have? And so this is, I feel, building on that work. And we'll continue to make sure that all of the decision-making is centered in who's at the table, whose benefits and burdened by the decisions of our work.
And if I might follow up, Mr. Chair, that's great. Thank you, John. And I knew that from what we had talked about, but I wanted that in our public record. I also want in our public record that being at the table is a necessary step toward racial equity. It isn't sufficient, though. It isn't the end objective. It is also a matter that not only do people and entire communities that have been left out of our planning and our consideration have a voice, but that the results of our planning resonate with them to the extent that they not just are allowed to participate or use our resources, but that they are operated and designed in such a way that they are compelling and they do use them.
Yes, agreed. Thank you, Counselor.
Thanks.
With Counselor Gonzalez, then Rosenthal and Lewis.
Thanks, Deputy President Wong. Well, folks, thanks again for sharing the presentation with us. This is thankfully the second opportunity I've had to see the slides, and I appreciate it because the first time I feel like my mind was blown a little bit in terms of the framework that you have been able to really co-develop alongside communities, has, balancing the tension of climate, of racial equity, of our conservation goals, and to find a way to also visualize that progress, and then to use a beautiful trillium flower at the end of the day to do that. I think just in general, and I feel like I was able to share a lot of feedback as well, and I'm trying to tap into that feeling from the first session. But my biggest takeaway is that from the initial conversation, from the initial audit, you took on the challenge to define that nature of access. What does access mean? Access in terms of process, access in terms of procurement, access in terms of the engagement in the way that we do the work. And I think in a lot of ways, it depends on the anecdotes that we have with the department, and maybe it depends on a project that we've been able to work on in a different corner of the region. We can see that, but is an anecdote always an example of an entire system and body of work? I think what I'm hopeful that this model is going to show us is going to help us, one, appreciate the really wonderful anecdotes that there are many of. For example, Chehalem Ridge, which is one that I've been able to work with y'all on. That's just one park of many different acres that we've been able to acquire here in the region. So I'm hopeful that the way that we roll this out helps people see how we do this work, live this work. And I guess the only question I have, and it was asked, and if someone else is going to ask it, sorry, but it's just to me going to be a matter of then how do we give the adequate value of weight depending on the size of a project. So if it's like a $500,000 project versus a $15 million project, and they're on their matrix, there's a general nature of there's like a different weight of impact to that. So I am wondering how we can find ways to distinguish that based off of some of the other models that we've seen. And I'm going back to the case studies and things.
Yeah.
I'm still noodling on that. But for the most part, I feel really, really optimistic about the work that you've been able to do here, and appreciate what I feel is a positive step.
Awesome. Well, I would just say thank you. I think you're kind of going one step deeper with kind of thinking about the type of information that we're going to try to pull together to tell that story of impact. And so I don't have all the answers yet in terms of like when we pull out specific anecdotes, how do we weigh the scale of one versus the other? But I do just want to say that as we kind of pull together qualitative, quantitative, and storytelling data, that is all going to be combined to kind of tell this broader impact story. We are going to be strategic about like, okay, which numbers make sense to tell, okay, across the region, how many acres, how many projects, and where it makes more sense to tell that kind of story based, and knowing that one way isn't going to answer all those questions. So not a full answer, but more to come. And I think that's kind of where we're headed next. So thank you.
Great. Can I ask a quick follow-up? Thanks. And I'm wondering too because this is essentially a draft, more polished product, but through the engagement process, especially with our CBO partners and communities of color as we are developing this, were there, in the development of the framework, were there like elements and items that were maybe hard to define, and you're like, how do we land into this framework for measuring and evaluation? Can you talk a little bit about those and how maybe they're not in the petals and the leaves, but how they might show up in maybe a sequential piece of the project? Does that question make sense?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not possible to measure everything through a simple framework like this.
Totally. Well, I guess I would say like so we have done that engagement at the high level, kind of petal level, and what kind of key checkpoint we did was during the
level. I love that. That's good stuff. Yeah.
During the levy renewal efforts and conversations in 2022, where we kind of had these outcomes for the bond and basically incorporated them with the levy framework that you all approved and referred. And so had conversations with community partners about those kind of high level outcomes and basically said, this is what you told us during the bond. Do these still align? And, a lot of it is that clean water, healthy habitat, salmon, steelhead lamprey, the species. I will be clear that I think what's to come is those conversations that you're envisioning. Okay. We've been part of this today is coming to council and saying like, does this align at a high level with you? okay, if so, let's build those tools out because I do think those community conversations are going to be really important to be like, how is this meaningful? How can we adjust this language? And we're just starting to kind of scratch the surface of those with the oversight committee and others.
Great.
Really appreciate the question.
Yeah, thanks.
Councilor Rosenthal.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. On my screen, it showed Councilor Lewis first, so I just misunderstood. Thank you. First of all, I like a multiphasic approach and I appreciate the comprehensive effort. I also appreciate the stem you added to the flower. That was in response particularly to Councilor Nolan, I believe, who said that the flower should have a stem, which is the support, and I thought that was cute. Just a couple of general comments and then one particular caveat. First of all, inherently in an urban setting, habitat and access are contradictory. However, you can improve habitat and you can improve access at the same time, but there is no such thing as a really healthy habitat anywhere within the metro area. We should recognize that. So if we buy lands at headwaters, we are doing habitat improvement, but you have problems with access. Blue Lake Park is a great access, but it's not really much of a habitat, frankly. So we have a contradiction here that I understand that Parks, Nature is really working with and is trying to, make both effective. And I think that this is one way to do it. And I look forward to the presentation to the steering committee to see how their response is going to be. I think there's some very interested and interesting people on the steering committee, and it's going to be very interesting to hear what they have to say. The only caveat I say, and I would extend the Councilor Nolan's comments a little bit and say, everybody, not just people who are racially diverse, but also people who are economically struggling and at lower income, everybody needs access to parks and recreation. And so I think that we have to extend that concept, not just in a racial sense, but also in an income sense to all the people that have either limited incomes, have limited access to transportation, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we have to consider that. And I think in the long run, I think keeping this multiphasic approach is going to be a very good idea, and it's going to get a lot of people thinking. But two metrics that I think have to remain, and if they don't stay emphasized, and this is similar to what Councilor Nolan was saying, would be the number of parks or park-like spaces close to neighborhoods, particularly neighborhoods that are equity challenged neighborhoods, and then access to the parks that exist through better transportation options for people who do not have full transportation or time considerations. I think those metrics have to remain in here as part of the consideration of access. And so to the extent I understand your assurances that this is not intended to diminish those, and I take that as a great thought. So I support this going forward, and I look forward to, like I said, the presentation to the steering committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you so much. I'm really delighted by the work that you've done to tell the story, not only of the bond, but of why Parks and Nature is valuable for the region. I find the flower to be a little bit of poetry. And, I do think art and science can coexist. So I was hoping you could tell me a little bit more about the visual storytelling, and if there would be something a little bit more like a dashboard as part of that. Additionally, how much of this is going to translate right now on our website? You can find out a lot about our specific parks that are open for recreational purposes. And you can find out next to nothing about our planning and our thoughts and our logic model behind how we manage our land. So tell me a little bit more about the visual storytelling. One, about if there will be this sort of dashboard, and two, how we're going to kind of tell our story, because it's not just a bond accountability tool, it's actually telling the story.
Yes. Okay. Great question. And I will take zero credit for the depiction of the Trillium. That we had a great consultant, Edie Leverett, who maybe some of you remember from some of other Metro things, who's worked with Metro on a bunch of different projects. And that's been a long process to get to that. So in parallel to this conversation, we are building out a story maps. And I assume that's something that you're familiar with for other projects that will live on Metro's website. And we're trying to make it as sort of easy to navigate as possible. And what I would be happy to do is we could spend some time in the coming months just sharing what that looks like. But basically, there's kind of an overview section that will have a performance evaluation for each of the petals. That's either kind of like a plus or a minus. And a lot of that's going to be based on, this is kind of a building year with our data, but a lot of it's going to be based on, are we expecting things to go, to move up, down, stay the same? And a lot of that data, it depends on what the context is. Obviously, land we acquire, we want to move, that's going to go up. Help we provide to our partners to advance their local share projects, that may stay steady as more partners submit projects. So we're going to have that. And then for each petal, and I'm sorry if I'm going into too much detail, but it's been very top of mind, we'll have some kind of dashboard style, like here's the top line, what we're doing on each of these direct outcomes for healthy habitat. That's going to be really easy to read, with some more opportunities to go further into more detail if folks want to, where we actually pull out, okay, this is a number that feels relevant to the storytelling. So that's, I think, going to be quite helpful and something we hope to have in the next couple of months to share with you all. It's also going to be something that you can, with story maps, you can clip pieces and share them out, put them in other emails and messages. Yeah. So does that answer that first question? I think it's probably going to, like, maybe there'll be some ongoing review and iteration of that too, to figure out how to make it most compelling to folks as they look at it. Cause it is a lot of scrolling in story maps, if you've ever experienced that before.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second question was more about like telling that broader story. So I would say that just one thing, and then if you have thoughts, like I think that it's important to remember that this is that one piece in part of the larger kind of parks and nature storytelling context. So we have and we will link to these in the story map. So we have a quarterly bond dashboard that reports every quarter on how much we've spent, how much we're awarding. We have the annual report that is that really high level. We have our news stories, we have our big backyard. This isn't going to replace any of those. And maybe moving forward, there's going to be more opportunities to kind of integrate it. We're working closely with our communications team on that, but I'm sure John has some deeper thoughts to that.
Yeah, everything that Beth said, and then I think what I was hearing from you, Councilor Lewis, was an invitation where if you go to the website, you can click on Blue Lake and you can see, great, there's all the information about Blue Lake. But if you wanted to know, what are some of our site conservation plans, or how do we go through, acquiring a property and moving it through stabilization into this sort of free to grow status, and where is that happening? It's not as easy. All that information is there. Like you all might see right now, we published a story on the acquisition on the Pudding River and why we did it, what the process is for how we'll go and update it out. I think you and one of the little ones is in the photo there. So we have lots of those in Metro News Stories and those different places, but you're right, there's not necessarily a place where you can click and say, hey, what are some of the ways that you do all this work and where have you done that work? It exists in lots of different places on the website. And so I'm saying, if that's what I think maybe what your question was, is how can we make it easier for folks to see all the collection of work without having to do maybe a little search throughout the website?
Yeah, the average person's not gonna go read through archives of Metro News,
Yeah.
nor should they be expected to.
Yeah. So like Beth said, we summarize at high level in the annual report, so you can see how many properties were acquired within the fiscal year, how many, acres and dollars spent on invasive weed maintenance and projects, and sort of where that reached. But in terms of getting a little bit more into some of the nitty gritty, it's there, but I'm hearing an invitation to find ways to help capture that a little bit more so that folks can really see. And then that might help too with Councilor Rosenthal's comment of how you're balancing access and habitat and how do those coexist, but also being able to see that the department's work in the region as an agency is multifaceted, and just how folks can see that a little bit easier. Thanks.
Thanks.
For me, I think, I really thought the Trillium graphic was really elegant and well done. I think for me, I really want to see that Trillium flower bloom as quickly as possible. And in this multi-dimensional concept, I was wondering if we could have time and efficiency as a concept as well that we're measuring. I'm thinking ahead just to this weekend. It's July 4th weekend. We're expecting 100-degree weathers, and I think there's part of a benefit that we're looking for is, can we deliver these benefits more quickly? And that should be a success indicator. And I think that's sometimes a critique we get is like, we have this amazing process, but then things take a long time to see it, on the ground and implemented, where, our climate is changing, annually. So I'm just wondering if that could be tied into some of the outcomes as well, as like, we're doing some great things, but the sooner we do them, the more benefit we'll see.
I guess I would just say, so like, okay, we really focused like a ton on like reporting today, but like zooming back out, I think it's important to remember like bond investments are still happening. Like right now, we're still doing all that stuff. It does take time, this is through the life of the bond and really beyond when we talk about these long-term outcomes. I think like there are places where we can highlight that efficiency piece. I think in the story maps, we are going to be tracking like, we want to be pretty close to full spend down by 2031. And here's how we're getting to that. That's not the same as like the outcomes on the ground, but to that end, we could kind of give a sense of like, this is where we thought we would be this fiscal year. And here's where we're at, and really just keep the pressure up to kind of move quickly. I guess the only other thing I would add is that these are long-term outcomes, and part of what we established as part of the evaluation and in response to the audit, and a lot of the great work that Scotty has done with the team, is to set kind of clearer and more time-bound milestones. And that gives us a little more like indicator in the short term, like, are we going to hit this longer term outcome? And so I think it still takes a while, but I think what we're doing is building some of those shorter term tools. So it's not like in 30 years, where are we going to be? It's in the next 5, in the next 10. And meanwhile, I think it's important for you all to keep asking those questions about moving forward and efficiency, because that's definitely a goal of the work. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely something we can look at, how that time efficiency piece is in there and how we can communicate that better.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's not just about efficiency. I think it's about that sense of urgency in delivering benefits. But I do like the, setting goals that are both like numbers metrics, but also time metrics as well.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things you challenged us with is not just, from a logic model, you have your input, you spend dollars, and the output is a park or an acquisition. You challenged us to say, well, what is the actual impact? What is the outcome of that? Which of those things, as you all are going through the agency's strategic targets, right, around the economy, housing, and climate, which of those things will we see happening, the benefits happening immediately, and which will those take maybe longer to see that change? And I think you're asking those great questions where we can show, here's some of those short-term outputs and outcomes from it. And here's where we anticipate checking in on those longer-term, like more meaningful outcomes of, if someone is helping to plan a park or facility, are they using it? Is it meeting all of their goals, hopes, dreams, aspirations? Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Rosenthal.
Yeah, if I might, Deputy Chair, just one quick question occurred to me. This is sort of proactive. We're developing this process for dealing with the audit. But one of my questions is, and maybe this is premature, have you given some thought how this is going to be integrated with the evaluation of large-scale community vision proposals?
Yeah, the way this is looking at is all of the evaluation of the bond. We're also looking at how we can use these overall framework for the levy as well. So being able to have an overall evaluation system that can meet all of the different, voter approved initiatives that we have as a department.
Will there be a specific, numerical rating or some sort of rating for proposals for large scale community visions that will come out of this, do you think? I mean, maybe I'm sure you haven't formulated that, in detail yet, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say because these are moving some of them are moving at the same time. I think this current round of large scale community visions proposals, which we want to bring to you all here in the near future, we can definitely start to incorporate these if we get the head nod from you all today that like, yep, this is the right direction, these are the things. So yeah, I think we can use that across the portfolio of work that we do.
And I would just say that the evaluation for those projects that you'll see when we bring those forward to you is based on the bond criteria and the program criteria. Those are kind of all captured at that high level. And so they will align, but I like where you're going and thinking about how we can use this for other bond programs and projects as a kind of like being more intentional about where we're trying to get.
Great, Councilor Nolan.
Mr. Chair, that provoked another thought in my mind. How do you anticipate that this approach will incorporate choices made by local governments for local shares? If I could see, for example, and the thought's not fully formed in my mind, but I'd like to know if you've thought about it or if it's worth thinking about. If local share investments are all made, to simplify this, in one area, one type of activity or investment, does that then inform us for region-wide that maybe we don't need to put as much of the regional resources into that kind of investment because the locals are, and we have the opportunity, and with a regional perspective, the mandate almost, to think about balancing it with the way we make our own choices, particularly investments?
Yes, I think two kind of things to answer. It's a great question. So the way that we're building out the reporting tools allows for kind of where aligned information to roll up from the park providers in terms of like what community engagement activities are they doing? Where are the projects that they're selecting? Do they overlap with equity focal areas? Where are they? So I think what we'll start to see when we get that information in from those projects is like everything we're reporting on includes that perspective. I do appreciate like you're talking about, okay, then once we have that information, as we have it, how are we using it to kind of like make decisions? And I think that's absolutely something we can and will do, especially as we expect to see more and more local share submissions from our park providers across the region, as well as more grant awards and large scale community visions. One area that I would just highlight as an example of this kind of underway now is Will Cortez, who manages our accessibility work, is doing that sort of like, there's an amount of money from bond to address ADA barriers at our sites. He's thinking not just about the barriers, but about site experience. So kind of one of the criteria I know he's looking at and doing a lot more than I can even describe is kind of in a regional perspective, what types of experiences could you get sort of across the system? And where are there then make needs to create more unique experiences, but not duplicating what already exists in terms of access to water or passive. So I think that's a good model, and I think we can explore that further.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add is, as part of the updating the system plan and being able to look at sort of continuing to look at the role in the region and where we might be prioritizing for the future. Our intent is I've been talking with the planning department, like Catherine Chiarlo and Malou, on the 2040 future vision refresh, and how does Parks and Nature system planning efforts tie into that larger view. And then also we meet at least quarterly with the other park directors and leadership around the region on a quarterly basis, just to share what's going on and what's happening. One of the exciting things is several cities have either recently updated their comprehensive park plans or are on the verge of that. So there's some opportunity where those locals that kind of know their communities best and are engaging with folks, and we've been sharing best practices on meaningful engagement, are starting to surface a lot of that. So we can use that from the lens of what do we provide to fill the gaps or the unique role in the region that we have. So being able to approach this from multiple ways.
Great, thanks.
Deputy Chair, if there are no more council questions, I just wanted to sort of summarize a little bit, because I think what I'm hearing, but I want to sort of double check this back, is there seems to be broad sort of comfort with this multidimensional concept of access. With some of the comments coming back from council around, how do we, if this direction, yes, and how do we maintain or even strengthen the focus on racial equity? How do we include an income-based focus as well in some of these programs? Really looking at how we visualize the dashboards and the data, but also combine that with storytelling, which I think is something we're doing across the agency broadly, but with the focus here. Not losing that sense of urgency, and how do we sort of build the time and efficiency milestones, into this process, And then finally, applying this framework really to all of our bond programs like large scale community visions, local share, et cetera. And I just wanted to make sure that I had sort of captured that feedback. So generally, yes, comfort moving forward with some of those comments and suggestions as well.
I think that's right. Good summary.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Great
Thank you.
work. Appreciate it. All right, we'll move on to Deputy Chief Operating Officer Communications.
Thank you. We mentioned it actually as folks were walking in today, getting ready for a heat wave, potentially a heat dome this weekend. And right now, just you're probably all tracking this as well. The National Weather Service is predicting pretty extreme heat this weekend. Temperatures over 100 degrees seem pretty likely. Some models are predicting temperatures could rise as high as 110. In a similar setup to what we had in the 2021 heat dome. So we're monitoring that. We're on calls with the county, really sort of tracking what that's going to look like, as the forecast changes over the next couple of days. Our Metro Emergency Management team is coordinating our response, and departments are preparing to activate our heat illness prevention policy for our employees and sites. We do expect some outdoor operations may be curtailed or closed during this heat event. So for the public, if you plan to head to Metro's transfer stations this weekend, please make sure to check the website first. Temperatures can get dangerous pretty quickly on the asphalt. So occasionally in these instances, we do see some early closures for safety. And we'll be asking our employees and our managers all across Metro to take our heat illness prevention seriously, pay attention to body's warning signs, take our required breaks, and just generally keep an eye on one another as we go into it.
There's just a question, what are the specific requirements or restrictions for the zoo when it do we have a temperature limit? Then we sort of, I don't know, set up cooling stations or something?
For our visitors or
For the visitors.
employees? For the visitors.
Visitors, staff, and animals.
Yeah, our heat illness prevention policy, and I don't have all of it right in front of me, has some very specific requirements as the heat rises above certain thresholds in terms of increased breaks, water breaks, shade. And we've really worked over the last year to train not just our managers, but actually our employees as well. I mean, we have a lot of employees who are like, no, it's okay. I'm just going to go finish up these few things. And we're like, no, you need to take a break. And so we're doing that on the employee side. On the visitor side, yeah, it's something the zoo rarely closes for heat. We do expect lower attendance. Usually when it gets really hot, we get lower attendance, but I think we also make sure that there's obviously plenty of hydration. We keep an eye on visitors and guests. I'd have to go back to check if we have ever closed for heat.
Yeah, I mean, the one suggestion I have is something that we're going to be dealing with in the future with the new zoo bond. But that entryway, which is where people meet, is pretty hot and temporary shade. It might be something that we could consider just so people. It's supposed to be over 100 for 3 days.
Yeah, no, it's a great. So I can follow back up with zoo ops. They may already have plans in place for that.
Do we have any facilities that become cooling centers?
We have in the past. Multnomah County generally coordinates those efforts in the county, and so they do occasionally ask us to use some of our facilities for cooling centers. Yeah.
But nothing anticipated for.
I haven't heard anything yet, but again, there are calls. I think tomorrow morning there's a coordination call with the county. I believe it's at 8:30, and then we have our after that our coordination call at 9, and then we'll schedule those calls over the next few days as well. I'm sure the county will have a daily call, which we always have staff on, and then we follow up. Given the information we get from the county, we follow up our internal operations, and so it is possible that request will come in.
Okay, thank you. All right, Councilor Communications. Councilor Rosenthal.
Oh, I'll just add one communication. There was 2 events this weekend, 2 Pride events, one in Tigard and one in Beaverton. Both were very colorful and well attended, had nice parades. And, as somebody who attended one of the original country fair down in Eugene, I'm all in favor of tie-dyed rainbow colors.
Thank you. Councilor Lewis.
Sure. I wanted to thank Brian Kennedy and Val Gostad for joining me at the Clackamas County Business Alliance on Thursday afternoon last week. We did some presentation coming out of the SAT and some listening to their reactions. It was a good group of folks, small, so it was almost intimate. And we had conversation about not only the success of the bond, obviously the need for more housing, and our work with supportive services.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, seeing no further discussion, the council work session is adjourned. I hope everyone enjoys the July 4th holiday and stays safe and cool. Our next regular meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, July 9th, 2024 at 10:30 a.m.